As an aside, the presence of oxidised LDL is quite reliably associated with something called the triglyceride to HDL ratio. There also being robust evidence that a low ratio is associated with a reduced risk of cardiovascular disease. And this is something that can easily be assessed using a standard blood lipid panel. There's another elephant in the room, of course, when it comes to heart disease, and that's diabetes, which is associated with a tripling of the risk of death from heart disease and stroke. That high levels of sugar in the blood are so problematic has been known for a long time. This research from 1962 demonstrated glucose abnormalities in 73% of heart attack patients. And again, the mechanism is oxidative stress. Both high and especially fluctuating blood glucose level generate oxidative stress at the level of the mitochondria, the consequences of which you saw earlier when combined with seed oil consumption, with oxidation products detectable in the blood for 3 days in diabetics. A very good reason to keep your blood glucose level in check. The corollary of all of this, that oxidation is a major cause of heart disease, is that antioxidant supplements may be beneficial. For example, the antioxidant N-acetylcysteine has been found to be protective against heart disease, as has the antioxidant coenzyme Q10. So I'd like to now circle back and finish off the discussion about seed oils. So I believe the evidence of harms from seed oils are convincing enough to discourage their consumption. So the consumption of seed oils began to rise in the early 1900s, well timed to have a causal role in the heart disease epidemic. And it's not just this association that suggests their consumption is problematic. 4 randomised controlled trials, the gold standard of research, have demonstrated harms from consuming seed oils. In this study from 1965, patients post-heart attack were randomly allocated to one of 3 groups. There were 2 intervention groups consuming a daily supplement of either olive or corn oil, and a control group on a regular diet. And after 2 years, 75% of the subjects in the control group remained free of repeat heart attacks, compared to 57% and 52% of those in the olive and corn oil groups, respectively. Hardly a ringing endorsement for olive or corn oil. The conclusion of the investigators was quite blunt, being that corn oil cannot be recommended for the treatment of ischemic heart disease. And in my opinion, this study also raises questions about olive oil. Now, the Sydney Diet Heart Study was a randomised controlled trial examining the effect of replacing saturated fat with polyunsaturated fat in men who'd had heart attacks. But despite being finished in 1973, the results regarding whether the intervention reduced cardiac mortality were destined to never actually be published. And it was only after Dr. Chris Ramsden uncovered the raw study data on punch cards and magnetic tapes in a basement that the full results were finally published some 40 years later. The key finding being that the increased intake of polyunsaturated fats, as found in seed oils, increased the risk of death in these men by 62%. A similar story exists for the Minnesota coronary experiment, which also finished in 1973. Now, this was a double-blinded randomised controlled trial on more than 9,000 men and women, again evaluating the effect of increasing polyunsaturated fats while reducing saturated fat. And again, there was an inexplicable delay in publishing the full findings. It took 16 years to publish a somewhat redacted version of the study findings. And again, a very similar story. The mortality data from the Minnesota coronary experiment, which was completed in 1973, was not published until 2016. And when the results were finally published 43 years later, after the raw data was located by Dr. Chris Ramsden, that same chap again, it was revealed that increased seed oil intake increased the chance of death, a result that was knowingly hidden for decades. And when the now deceased lead author was asked about this delay, he explained it was because they found the results disappointing. Now, more recently,